The air in the lawyer's office was thick with the scent of old paper and greed, a suffocating combination that felt purpose-built for this moment. My stepmother, Eleanor, dabbed at a dry eye with a pristine handkerchief, a perfect portrait of feigned grief. Beside her, her son, Marcus, my stepbrother, couldn't quite contain his smirk. They thought this was it, the final nail in the coffin of my relevance. Mr. Harrison, my father's longtime solicitor, cleared his throat, his voice a dull drone as he read through the preamble of the last will and testament of Richard Sterling. I watched their faces, not his. I watched the smug certainty bloom there. And when he reached the final bequeathal, skipping my name, Melinda, entirely, it was almost comical. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. It's funny, isn't it, how a person's entire life can be reduced to a few dry paragraphs read aloud in a stuffy room. My father, Richard, was anything but a dry paragraph. He was a universe contained in a single man, a creator of miniature worlds. His workshop was my real childhood home, more so than the pristine, sterile house Eleanor curated. It smelled of mineral oil, aging wood, and the sharp, clean scent of brass. Light from a single large window would cut through the dusty air, illuminating motes that danced like tiny stars around the intricate guts of a grandfather clock or the delicate heart of a pocket watch. He called me his shadow, not in a dismissive way, but with a quiet pride. From the time I was 7 years old, I'd sit on a tall stool, my chin barely clearing the workbench, and watch his hands. They were large, calloused hands, yet they moved with the impossible grace of a surgeon, coaxing life into springs and gears no bigger than a grain of rice. He taught me patience. He taught me that every piece, no matter how small or hidden, had a critical function. The beauty isn't just in the face, Melinda, he'd say, his voice a low rumble. It's in the movement. The truth is in how it works, how it endures. That was our secret language, the language of horology. While Eleanor and Marcus saw his obsession with timepieces as a quaint, dusty hobby that thankfully paid the bills, I saw it as philosophy. I saw the art. By 15, I could reassemble a Verge escapement blindfolded. By 20, I was designing my own movements, intricate little ballets of metal that my father would study with a jeweler's loupe, a rare, brilliant smile gracing his face. He'd point out a flaw or suggest an improvement, not as a critique but as a collaboration. We were partners. Eleanor saw me as a rival for his time. Marcus saw me as a weirdo who preferred gears to gossip. They never once set foot in the workshop unless it was to tell my father that dinner was getting cold or that some important, vapid socialite was on the phone. They saw the value of his work only in the numbers on a bank statement, never in the soul of it. They couldn't tell a tourbillon from a turnip, and they wore that ignorance like a badge of honor, proof of their superiority over such grubby pursuits. They fundamentally misunderstood him, and by extension, they fundamentally underestimated me. They saw the quiet girl in the dusty workshop and assumed she was simple. They never realized I was just listening to the ticking of a far more complex clock. I was learning that the most important movements are the ones you can't see, the ones that happen silently, patiently, until the moment is right for the hands to strike. Their campaign of erasure was a masterclass in subtlety, a slow drip poison administered over nearly 2 decades. It began not long after my mother passed, and my father, in a fit of grief and loneliness, married Eleanor. She was a sculpture of cool elegance, all sharp angles and muted tones, and she immediately identified me as a variable she couldn't control. So, she began to sand down my edges, to make me smaller in my own home. It was never a direct confrontation. That wasn't her style. It was the, "Oh, Melinda, you have grease on your cheek again in front of guests," said with a tinkling laugh that framed me as a charmingly feral child, not a serious apprentice. It was the way she'd forget to set a place for me at the dinner table if I was working late with my father, the silent implication being that my work was an extracurricular activity, not the future of the family business. Marcus, a full 10 years my senior and her biological son from a previous marriage, was a blunter instrument but no less effective. He was the one who nicknamed me Cinderella of the Cogs, a title that my aunts and uncles, the background cowards, found terribly amusing. They would chuckle along at family gatherings, these silent enablers who saw the dynamic unfold but found it easier to laugh than to intervene. Why rock the boat? Eleanor hosted such lovely parties after all. I remember one Christmas vividly. I had spent 6 months crafting a special watch for my father, a skeleton watch where the entire intricate movement was visible. I had even engraved a tiny, almost microscopic message on the mainspring barrel. For the man who taught me time. I was buzzing with excitement to give it to him. But at the family gift exchange, before I could present it, Marcus handed our father a ridiculously expensive brand-name Swiss watch. "Got you a real watch, Richard," he'd boomed. "Something you can wear to the club, not one of those dusty things from the shop." Eleanor had beamed, and the enablers, my Aunt Carol and Uncle Jean, had all murmured their approval at the shiny, soulless thing. When I finally gave my father my gift, the moment was soured. He loved it, I could see it in his eyes, but Eleanor had immediately said, "Oh, how sweet. Another little project. You can keep it with your other things, dear." She didn't mean his collection of masterpieces. She meant the box of prototypes and failures. My gift, my heart, was relegated to a thing, and my father, already growing weary from the constant emotional attrition, didn't fight her on it. That was their true genius. They never attacked my father's love for me directly. Instead, they devalued the foundation of it, the shared passion that bound us together, until even he began to see it as less significant. The turning point, the first glimmer of the coming storm, happened on my father's 70th birthday, about 2 years before he passed. It was a grand affair, of course, orchestrated by Eleanor to showcase their social standing. The house was filled with people who barely knew my father but adored his bank account. I felt like a ghost, drifting through rooms in my own home. I finally found him, not in the main hall with the orchestra, but in his study, staring out the window. He looked tired, older than his 70 years. He saw my reflection in the glass and beckoned me over. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old, tarnished brass key. It wasn't a key to any door in the house. I knew all of those. It was a watchmaker's key, used for winding very old, very specific clocks. "You know what this is for," he said, pressing it into my palm. His skin felt like paper. I recognized it instantly. It was the key to the chronometer he'd made for the Naval Observatory, his masterpiece, the piece that won him the Prix Gaia. It was on loan to a museum in Geneva, locked in a climate-controlled case. "Why are you giving me this, Dad?" I asked, my throat tight. He looked over his shoulder toward the sound of laughter from the party. "Some mechanisms are designed with a fail-safe," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "A hidden spring, a secondary escapement that only engages when the main one is compromised." He looked me straight in the eye, and the fog of his weariness cleared for a moment, revealing the sharp, brilliant man I knew. The face can lie, Melinda. It can be elegant and beautiful, and tell you the wrong time entirely. You have to look at the movement. You always have to look at the movement. He then pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "This is my design log, the old one, before the computers. Everything I ever truly valued is in here." He tapped the cover. "It belongs with the key. Don't let the face fool you." He made me hide the notebook and the key in my purse, just as Eleanor glided into the room, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "Richard, darling, everyone is asking for you. And Melinda, stop monopolizing your father." He gave me one last meaningful look before she led him away. I didn't understand it all then, not fully. But I understood the weight of the key in my hand and the gravity in his voice. It was a warning, it was a contingency plan. He was telling me that the clock was being tampered with, and he was trusting me, his shadow, to one day set it right. The last 6 months of my father's life were a slow-motion nightmare orchestrated with chilling efficiency. His illness came on suddenly, a rapid decline that seemed to drain the light from him day by day. This was the moment Eleanor and Marcus had been waiting for, the perfect opportunity to sever the final link between my father and me. They became his gatekeepers. "The doctor says he needs absolute quiet," Eleanor would tell me on the phone, her voice dripping with false concern. "The stress of visitors is just too much for him." At first, I believed her. I would drop off soups and books, leaving them on the doorstep like an offering. I'd call, and Marcus would answer, always with the same line. "He's sleeping, Melinda. I'll tell him you called." But days turned into weeks. The updates became more vague. "He's having a difficult day. He's not really lucid." The wall they built around him was intangible but impenetrable. When I tried to insist, to push my way past them, they turned my concern into a weapon against me. "Melinda, you're being selfish," Eleanor said once, her voice cold as ice. "You're thinking about what you want, not what your dying father needs. You're upsetting him." They gaslit me to anyone who would listen. To Aunt Carol, they'd sigh and say, "We wish Melinda would understand. She's in denial about how serious this is. Her constant pestering is causing him so much anxiety." And the enablers would nod sympathetically, telling me to give my father his space, to trust that Eleanor knew best. The isolation was agonizing. I was grieving a man who was still alive, locked out of his final chapter. I would park my car down the street from the house at night, just staring at his bedroom window, a single light burning behind the curtain. Was he awake? Was he thinking of me? Or did he, as they claimed, believe I had abandoned him? The worst part was the doubt that began to fester. Did he resent me? Did he believe their lies? They had spent years painting me as the odd, detached one. Perhaps, in his weakened state, the paint had finally dried. The pain of that thought was a physical thing, a constant ache in my chest. They weren't just isolating him, they were trying to overwrite our history, to replace the truth of our bond with a more convenient fiction, one where I was the uncaring daughter and they were the devoted, long-suffering saints. It was the ultimate betrayal, not just of me, but of him. They were stealing his final moments, curating his death to fit their narrative. The breakthrough, the crack in their perfectly constructed wall, came from an unlikely source, a delivery of library books. My father had been a voracious reader, and I had a standing order to pick up his requests from the local library. For the past few months, the requests had stopped. Then, one Tuesday, I got a call from the librarian. "A request just came in for Mr. Sterling," she said. It was an online request, placed that morning. I was stunned. He was supposedly too weak to even hold a phone. The book was an obscure one, a treatise on the detached lever escapement by Thomas Mudge. It was a technical manual from the 18th century, one we had studied together years ago. My heart started hammering in my chest. This wasn't a casual read, this was a message. I rushed to the library, my hands trembling as I signed the book out. I sat in my car and flipped through the brittle pages, and then I saw it. On page 112, a tiny, faint pencil mark. A single word, Harrison, Mr. Harrison, my father's lawyer. It was the page that detailed the safety roller, a component in a watch that prevents overbanking, a failsafe to protect the delicate balance of the mechanism from a sudden shock. My father was telling me the system had received a shock. He was telling me to engage the failsafe. He was telling me who to trust. It was all there, a message in a bottle, sent from his gilded prison. That single word, Harrison, was a key, just like the brass one he'd given me. It unlocked a new path. The grief and helplessness that had been drowning me for months receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The patient genius he had trained me to be finally woke up. They thought they had him completely under their control, but they had underestimated his intellect, just as they had always underestimated mine. They had allowed a single book request to slip through, a tiny gear they didn't even notice in their grand, greedy machine. But as my father had taught me, the smallest gear can be the most critical. It can change the entire direction of the movement. In that moment, sitting in the library parking lot with an ancient book in my lap, the game changed. I was no longer the grieving daughter knocking on a locked door. I was a watchmaker with a broken timepiece, and I finally had the instructions on how to repair it. My strategy began. My investigation started that very afternoon. The first phase was observation without detection. I was no longer Melinda, the distraught daughter. I was Melinda, the horologist, examining a broken mechanism for clues. I began by documenting everything. I kept a detailed log of every phone call, every rebuffed visit, every condescending lie from Eleanor and Marcus. I used a simple spreadsheet: date, time, person, stated reason for isolation, my observation. The patterns that emerged were damning. They claimed he was sleeping at the exact same time. A grocery delivery service noted he had signed for a delivery. They said he was non-verbal on a day when a nurse, a temporary hire I managed to track down, told me he had spoken to her at length about the weather. This nurse, a kind woman named Clara, became my first unwitting source. I ran into her at a coffee shop near the hospital, feigning surprise. I played the part of the worried, confused daughter perfectly. "I just don't know what to believe," I'd said, my voice cracking. "They make it sound like he's already gone." Clara, seeing my distress, softened. She told me that while my father was weak, he was often perfectly lucid. She mentioned that his son, Marcus, had been bringing him legal papers to sign, and that Mr. Sterling had seemed agitated afterward. She mentioned that Eleanor had dismissed his long-term private nurse, a woman who had been with him for years, in favor of a rotating cast of agency nurses who didn't know the family history. Every detail was a tiny gear clicking into place. I started to dig into their finances, discreetly. My father had given me access to one of the business accounts years ago, an account Eleanor had forgotten about. I saw the exorbitant spending: new cars, designer clothes, a down payment on a vacation home in a different country, all happening while my father was supposedly on his deathbed. They weren't just planning for their inheritance, they were spending it. This wasn't grief, it was a celebratory shopping spree. I drove by the house at different times of day, noting who came and went. I saw a different lawyer, not Mr. Harrison, visiting the house twice. A quick search identified him as a man known for expedited estate planning, with a reputation for being flexible, for a price. The picture was becoming brutally clear. They were systematically isolating him, manipulating him, and liquidating his legacy before he was even gone. The most damning piece of evidence came from the old design log he had given me. Tucked into a sleeve in the back cover was a recent, signed and notarized statement from my father. It was dated just after his 70th birthday. It stated that he was of sound, mind and body, and that he had a deep and abiding fear of Eleanor's financial and emotional ambitions. He stated that any legal documents signed after that date under her supervision should be considered suspect and likely produced under duress. He had laid the groundwork for me. He had left me the schematics for his own rescue. Armed with my folder of evidence, the spreadsheet, the nurse's testimony, the financial records, the lawyer's name, and my father's notarized statement, I made the call. I requested a meeting with Mr. Harrison, stating only that it was a matter of extreme urgency regarding my father's estate. His office was exactly as I remembered it from my youth. Dark wood, leather chairs, a faint smell of peppermint. He was a man who seemed to be carved from the same oak as his desk, sturdy, impassive, and old. He listened without interruption as I laid out my case. I didn't present it with emotion. I presented it like a watchmaker explaining a malfunction. I laid out the timeline, the inconsistencies, the financial drains. I spoke of the new lawyer. I showed him a photo of the page from the treatise with his name faintly circled. He examined everything, his face unreadable. When I finished, there was a long silence. He tented his fingers, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "Melinda," he said, his voice grave, "your father was my client. I am bound by a duty of confidentiality that extends beyond his death. What you are alleging is extremely serious." I felt a flicker of despair. Was he going to stonewall me? But, he continued, leaning forward, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something other than professional duty in his eyes. "I also have a duty to see that my client's true wishes are carried out. And your father..." Richard was a brilliant man. He was also a man who understood human nature. He stood up and walked to a large safe, hidden behind a painting of a clipper ship. He spun the dial with practiced ease and pulled out a long, sealed manila envelope. The seal was wax, impressed with my father's signet ring, the one he always wore. "Your father foresaw this," Mr. Harrison said, placing the envelope on the desk between us. "He came to me about 18 months ago, not long after his birthday. He was worried. He said Eleanor was persuasive. He was afraid that as he grew weaker, his will would not be his own. He tapped the envelope. He called this the fail-safe. He drafted 2 documents. The first was a will that he predicted would be very close to what Eleanor and Marcus would eventually compel him to sign. A version that would give them everything. He signed it and left it with me, to be kept separately. Then he picked up the sealed envelope. This is the second document, his true last will and testament. He also left me a letter with very specific instructions. We were to let them play their hand. We were to allow them to present their version of the will. We were to let them believe they had won. His exact words were, "Greed makes people loud, Harrison. Let them shout their victory from the rooftops, so the world can hear it when the clock strikes 13. I stared at the envelope, a wave of relief so profound it almost made me weep. My father hadn't been a victim. He had been a grandmaster, setting the board for a game they didn't even know they were playing. And Mr. Harrison, the emotional anchor, wasn't just a lawyer. He was the executor of the plan. He was my ally. I finally understood the full meaning of his words that night. The face can lie. You have to look at the movement. The will reading to come was just the face of the clock. The real movement was here, in this envelope, waiting silently to engage. The plan Mr. Harrison and I solidified in his office was one of brutal, poetic simplicity. It required me to play the hardest role of my life, the defeated daughter. I had to attend the will reading, listen to my own disinheritance, and show nothing but believable grief and resignation. I had to let Eleanor and Marcus have their moment of triumph. I had to absorb their pity, their condescending pats on the shoulder, their smug, triumphant glances. It was a strategy of delayed catharsis, a slow burn designed to make the eventual explosion all the more spectacular. The days leading up to the reading were an exercise in emotional fortitude. I had to grieve my father for real, while simultaneously preparing to act out a fiction for the benefit of his tormentors. It was a strange, disorienting duality. Every time I felt a surge of rage at the thought of Eleanor's smirking face, I had to suppress it and channel it into the quiet, cold resolve the plan required. I practiced my expression in the mirror, a carefully calibrated mixture of sadness, shock, and weary acceptance. I chose my outfit with theatrical precision, a simple black dress, conservative and unassuming. I wanted to look like someone who had already lost, someone who expected nothing. The plan hinged on their overconfidence. As my father had predicted, their greed would make them loud. They needed to feel so completely victorious that they would expose the depths of their character to the few family members present. Harrison would read the false will, the one my father had cleverly drafted, to be almost identical to the one they had forced him to sign in his final days. This would validate their efforts, making them feel secure. Then, at the peak of their gloating, when they were busy mentally redecorating the house and liquidating the business, Mr. Harrison would introduce the failsafe. The hardest part was knowing I couldn't share this with anyone. I had to endure the sympathetic, pitying phone calls from Aunt Carol, who said things like, "Honey, we all knew your father and Eleanor were very close. Try not to be bitter." Each word was a small twist of the knife, yet I had to thank her for her concern. I had to walk into that room utterly alone, surrounded by people who either despised me or had stood by and done nothing. But my father's words echoed in my mind. The beauty is in the movement. This was the quiet, hidden part of the mechanism. This was the patient, silent work before the chime. The thought of their faces when the truth came out became my fuel. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about honor. It was about reclaiming the narrative, about ensuring that the final word on my father's life was his own, not the cheap, forged story his wife and stepson had created. I was the guardian of his truth, and I would play my part. Looking back, my father's final days take on a different, sharper focus. The wall of isolation Eleanor and Marcus built was not just an act of casual cruelty, it was a strategic necessity for their plan. They couldn't risk a moment of clarity, a whispered conversation, a scribbled note that might undo their work. Every blocked phone call, every visitor turned away, was a deliberate move to create a sterile environment where their influence would be absolute. The knowledge of my father's counterplan doesn't erase the pain of that time, but it reframes it. He wasn't just a passive victim sinking into the fog. He was an unwilling captive, sending out coded messages, trusting that I, his shadow, would decipher them. The frustration I felt was a mirror of his own. The helplessness I endured was a pale echo of the duress he was under. He had been forced to sign a document that was a betrayal of everything he valued, a testament to his own imprisonment. The image of him, frail in his bed, with Marcus looming over him holding a pen and a sheaf of papers, is one that will forever be burned into my mind. I imagine the pressure, the emotional blackmail. Sign it, Richard, it's for the best. Don't you want to make sure Eleanor is taken care of? Melinda doesn't want this burden. She has her own life. They would have used his love for me against him, twisting it into a reason to cut me out. My grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, began to transform. It solidified into something harder, something with an edge. It became a whetstone against which I sharpened my resolve. The sorrow was still there, a deep, aching void where my father used to be, but now it was entwined with a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about winning. It was about fulfilling his last wish, executing his final, brilliant design. It was my duty to see it through. The night before the will reading, I sat in the workshop. His workshop, which I hadn't dared to enter since his death. The air was still and cool. I picked up his loop from the workbench and held it to my eye. I looked at the half-finished movement on its stand, a complex assembly of gears and springs frozen in mid-creation. It was a perfect metaphor. A beautiful machine, silenced before its time. I vowed in that moment that I would not let his legacy be silenced. I would not let his name be tarnished by their greed. I would not let the story end with their forgery. I would be the hidden spring. I would be the fail-safe. I would make the clock strike 13. And so here we are, back in the stuffy room. The echo of the final, damning sentence of the false will still hangs in the air, and the remainder of my estate, including all properties, assets, and control of Sterling horology, I leave to my beloved wife, Eleanor Sterling. A theatrical sniffle from Eleanor. She dabs her perfectly dry eye. Marcus places a comforting hand on her shoulder, but his eyes meet mine across the table. There it is, a flash of pure, unadulterated triumph. It's a look I've seen 1,000 times. The look he gave me when he presented that soulless brand-name watch. The look he gave me every time he called me the Cinderella of the cogs. It's the look of a man who believes he has finally, definitively, put me in my place. Aunt Carol leans towards me, her face a mask of practiced pity. Melinda, honey, I'm so sorry. If you need anything, she whispers, her voice trailing off as she glances nervously at Eleanor, the new queen. Uncle Jean just nods grimly, avoiding my gaze entirely. They are the background cowards, already aligning themselves with the new center of power. I am an island, a footnote, and I have to let them believe it. I look down at my hands, clasped in my lap. I allow a single, calculated tear to trace a path down my cheek. I don't sob, I don't rage. I project an image of profound, broken defeat. It's what they expect. It's what they crave. My silence is their confirmation. Inside, however, there is no storm. There is a deep, cold calm. It's the calm at the center of a spinning tourbillon, a point of absolute stillness around which the world revolves. I am watching a play, a performance I have helped orchestrate. Every sigh from Eleanor, every smirk from Marcus, is a line in a script they don't know has a surprise final act. Well, Marcus says, breaking the silence with a tone of forced solemnity. I suppose we should start making arrangements. Dad would have wanted us to be proactive. He looks at Eleanor. We should talk to the realtor about the house first thing, and the workshop. We'll need to have the contents appraised, sold off for parts. My father's soul measured and tagged like scrap metal. The rage flickers, a hot spark in the cold calm, but I extinguish it. Not yet. Patience. The most important movements are the ones you cannot see. Let them shout their victory. Let them be loud. Eleanor stands up, a picture of newfound authority. Yes, Marcus, you're right. There's so much to do. She smooths down her black dress, a gesture that is less about tidiness and more about preening. She turns to me, her voice now laden with a syrupy, condescending kindness that is more insulting than any anger. Melinda, dear, don't you worry about a thing. We'll make sure you get your father's personal effects, of course. His books, some photographs. We know how much you valued those little things. The little things, my entire life's work, my bond with my father, reduced to a box of trinkets. She is dismissing me, tidying me away like an old piece of furniture. Marcus is already on his phone, presumably looking up the number of a luxury car dealership. Aunt Carol and Uncle Gene are murmuring their goodbyes, eager to escape the awkwardness of my presence, to leave the loser to her loss. They are all moving towards the door, the play seemingly over, the curtain falling on their triumph. And then, it happens. A sound that cuts through the smug certainty like a shard of glass. Mr. Harrison clears his throat. It's not a loud sound, but it has the acoustic weight of a slamming vault door. Everyone freezes. They turn back from the door, expressions of mild irritation on their faces. They had their victory. What more could there be? If I could have everyone's attention for just one more moment, Mr. Harrison says, his voice perfectly level. He doesn't look at them. He looks directly at me, a brief, almost imperceptible nod. This is it. The hidden spring is about to be released. There appears to be one more document to review. Eleanor's smile tightens. I'm sure that's not possible, Mr. Harrison. We have the will. It was quite clear. Indeed, Mr. Harrison replies, his gaze still steady. The will you just heard was quite clear. However, it is not the final one. Marcus snorts, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. What are you talking about? That was his signature. We were there. A fatal admission, but he's too arrogant to realize it. The atmosphere in the room has changed. The thick, cloying air of greed is being replaced by the thin, sharp air of confusion. The smugness on their faces begins to curdle, replaced by a dawning, uncertain dread. They are looking at the face of the clock, and it's just told them an hour they didn't think existed. Mr. Harrison reaches into the leather briefcase at his feet, a briefcase that has sat untouched this entire time. He pulls out the long manila envelope, the one with the wax seal, my father's signet ring pressed into the dark red wax. He places it on the polished mahogany desk with a soft, definitive thud. The sight of it silences everyone. The seal is an undeniable mark of authenticity, a ghost from the past asserting its authority. Eleanor stares at it, her perfectly made-up face suddenly pale. "What is that?" she asks, her voice a strained whisper. "This, Mr. Harrison says, taking a small letter opener and sliding it carefully under the seal, is a letter your late husband entrusted to me, to be opened only at this specific time, in this specific company." He unfolds a single sheet of paper, written in my father's familiar, elegant script. The room is so quiet I can hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Mr. Harrison begins to read. "To whom it may concern, but most especially to my wife, Eleanor, and my stepson, Marcus. If you are hearing this, it means I was not strong enough to protect myself at the end, and the avarice I long feared has come to pass. I have been forced to sign a document under extreme emotional duress, a document that is a betrayal of my life's work and my life's love-me daughter, Melinda." Eleanor gasps, a hand flying to her chest. It's pure theatre, but the audience has turned against her. For years, Mr. Harrison continues, reading my father's words, "I have watched you dismiss her talent, devalue her spirit, and misunderstand the very essence of who I am. You see my work as a source of funds, not a source of soul. You saw my daughter's devotion as a quirk, not as the continuation of my legacy. You wanted my money, but you never wanted me. Melinda wanted nothing but my time, and in doing so she understood everything." The words land like stones in the silent room. My father's voice, clear and strong, is speaking from beyond the grave, and it is a voice of judgment. Therefore I created this failsafe, a mechanism to protect my legacy from those who would melt it down for scrap. The will you have just heard is a decoy, a mirror to your own greed. I signed it because I had to. But my true intentions are contained in a second document, the only valid last will and testament of Richard Sterling. I love my daughter, Melinda. She is the keeper of my time, the master of my art. You have gravely, fatally underestimated her, and me." When Mr. Harrison finishes the letter, he folds it carefully. The smoking gun hasn't just been revealed, it has been fired, and the truth is echoing in the silence. The shock in the room is a physical presence. Eleanor and Marcus are frozen, their faces a mottled canvas of disbelief and dawning horror. Aunt Carol and Uncle Gene look like they've seen a ghost, which, in a way, they have. Mr. Harrison picks up a second, thicker document from within the manila envelope. "And now," he announces to the silent room, The true and final will of Richard Sterling, dated 18 months ago, signed and witnessed by 2 judges from the federal court. He begins to read, and this time the words are not dry and legalistic, they are a symphony of vindication. He reads the clauses that provide for the upkeep of the workshop, for the continuation of the business under its rightful heir. He reads the part about my father's collection of antique timepieces, each one named and designated to be kept, not sold. And then he comes to the main bequeathal. To my daughter, my partner, my shadow, Melinda Sterling, I leave the entirety of my business, Sterling Horology, including all designs, patents, and tools. I also leave her the family home and the adjoining workshop, for it is her true home as it was mine. Finally, the remainder of my financial estate, held in stocks, bonds, and trusts, I leave to her, with my complete faith that she will use it to honor the spirit of creation, not the worship of consumption. A wave of dizziness washes over me. It's the totality of it, the absolute, unwavering faith he had in me. But he wasn't finished. There was a final clause. Mr. Harrison took a sip of water, drawing out the moment. To my wife, Eleanor Sterling, and my stepson, Marcus Thorne, he read, his voice devoid of emotion. For their years of companionship, I leave the sum of $5,000 each. $5,000. It's an amount so precisely calculated as to be the ultimate insult enough to prevent them from contesting the will on the grounds of being forgotten, but so pitifully small compared to their expectations that it's a slap in the face. This bequeathal, Mr. Harrison read on, delivering the final, crushing blow, is conditional. To receive the funds, they must each complete 1,000 hours of volunteer service at the downtown homeless shelter, a place where they might finally learn the value of things that cannot be bought. The poetic justice was breathtaking. He wasn't just disinheriting them, he was sentencing them to a penance that was the philosophical opposite of their entire existence. The room was utterly, completely silent, save for the sound of my own ragged breath. The silence shatters. It's Eleanor who breaks first. The mask of the grieving widow doesn't just crack, it explodes into 1,000 pieces. A raw, guttural screech tears from her throat. No, that's not possible. He wouldn't do that. Her face, moments before a picture of pale shock, is now flushed with a furious, ugly red. She points a trembling finger at me, her eyes wild with hate. You did this. You poisoned him against me. You manipulated him. You little snake. The transformation is terrifying and, in a dark way, deeply satisfying. The poised, elegant woman is gone, replaced by a desperate, shrieking harpy. All the years of suppressed venom are coming out in one volcanic eruption. Marcus, who had been standing as if turned to stone, jolts back to life. He stumbles forward, his face a mess of confusion and rage. This is a fake. Harrison, you're in on it. This is fraud. My mother dedicated her life to him. We cared for him. She was the one there at the end, not her. He gestures wildly at me, his voice cracking with desperation. She abandoned him. We told you. Everyone knows she abandoned him. Their carefully constructed narrative is their only defense, and they cling to it, shouting it into the void. The emotional contrast is stark and brutal. The smug, condescending whispers have been replaced by the panicked, shrill accusations of cornered animals. All the pretense of sophistication has vanished, revealing the raw, grasping greed beneath. Eleanor turns on Mr. Harrison now. I'll sue you. I'll have you disbarred. You can't do this. Richard loved me. That will, the one you read first, that was the real one. He signed it. Yes, Mr. Harrison says calmly, his composure only highlighting her hysteria. He did sign it, under duress, as he so clearly stated in his letter. And you, Marcus, have just admitted you were present when he did so, which will make an interesting addition to my notes for the probate court. The mention of court sends another jolt of panic through them. Their world is unraveling in real time, their victory turning to ash in their mouths. The condescending fools, so blinded by their own arrogance, had never once considered that my quiet, underestimated father could have outsmarted them. They never considered that I could be anything other than a doormat. Their downfall isn't my fault, it's theirs. It's the inevitable result of a lifetime of overconfidence and underestimation. They built this trap for themselves. My father just made sure the door would lock behind them. For the entire duration of their meltdown, I have remained silent, watching. I let their hysteria fill the room. I let their accusations hang in the air. Now, as Eleanor pauses for a ragged breath and Marcus sputters into stunned silence, I finally speak. My voice, when it comes, is not loud. It's quiet, cold, and carries to every corner of the room. Abandoned him, I ask, the rhetorical question sharp as a scalpel. I look directly at Marcus, then at Eleanor. Did I abandon him, or was I locked out? Did I refuse to visit, or were my calls never put through? Did I not care, or did you tell him I didn't? I don't raise my voice. I don't need to. The quiet intensity of the truth is more powerful than their frantic screaming. I turn my gaze to Eleanor. You talk about love. Did you love him, or did you love what he could provide? When was the last time you set foot in his workshop, Eleanor? Do you even know the name of the masterpiece he spent 5 years creating? The one that sits in a museum in Geneva. She just stares at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish. She has no answer. You thought he was a doddering old fool in the end, didn't you? I continue, my voice remaining level, each word precise. You thought his mind was as weak as his body, but you never understood him. You saw a man who made clocks. I saw a man who understood time. He knew this day would come. He knew you. He saw every gear in your little machine, and he built a better one. I stand up, slowly. I am no longer the hesitant girl in the corner. I feel a strength I have never felt before, an empowerment born from justice served. You didn't just try to steal an inheritance, I say, my voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, which is somehow more chilling. You tried to steal his memory. You tried to rewrite his life to suit your greed. You tried to erase me. Did you really think I would let you? Did you really think the daughter he raised in that workshop, the one he taught to see the hidden mechanisms, would just walk away? My final question hangs in the air, a verdict and a condemnation all in one. The clever vindication is not in shouting, it's in this cold, righteous assertion of the truth. They have no response. They are broken. They have been so thoroughly, intellectually, and strategically outmaneuvered that all they have left is noise, and it has finally died in their throats. In the ringing silence that follows my words, all eyes in the room are on me. Eleanor and Marcus are shells, their fury imploded into shocked, empty husks. But it's the reaction of the background cowards that is most telling. Aunt Carol, who just an hour ago was offering me her pathetic, pitying condolences, now looks at me with a mixture of awe and terror. She takes a hesitant step forward, her face stretched into a sycophantic, unnatural smile. Melinda. My goodness. We had no idea. Congratulations. Your father, he was a brilliant man. So clever. Her voice is thick with a desperate attempt to realign herself with the new reality, to get on the right side of history now that the victor has been declared. Uncle Gene, who had been so careful to avoid my gaze, is now staring at me, nodding vigorously in agreement with his wife. Yes, brilliant, he echoes. We always knew you had it in you, Melinda. Your father was so proud. The hypocrisy is so potent it's almost nauseating. The memory of their chuckles at the Cinderella of the Cogs nickname, their silent complicity, their easy acceptance of the narrative painted by Eleanor and Marcusitz, all fresh in my mind. They weren't just bystanders. Their passivity was the soil in which Eleanor's manipulation grew. I give them a long, cold look. I don't smile. I don't offer them any warmth or forgiveness. A little late for that, don't you think I say, my voice flat. Aunt Carol's smile falters. The colour drains from her face. They understand. There is no easy absolution here. My victory is mine alone. It was forged in isolation, built on a foundation of their indifference. Their support now is worthless, an insult to the struggle I endured while they stood by and watched. This moment isn't about welcoming them back into the fold. It's about highlighting their cowardice, about making them understand the consequence of their silence. My vindication is not a party they are invited to. It is a quiet, solitary triumph. They shrink back, chastened, finally understanding that the power dynamic in this family has been irrevocably, seismically altered. I am no longer the odd, quiet girl they could safely ignore. I am the one who holds the keys. I am the one who understands the movement. And I have a very, very long memory. Mr. Harrison, with the quiet efficiency of a man who has seen many dramas play out in this room, gestures to the door. "I believe our business is concluded," he says, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of finality. He looks pointedly at Eleanor and Marcus. They don't move. They are still processing the totality of their ruin. It's Marcus who finally seems to grasp the reality of the situation. He grabs Eleanor's arm, his voice a harsh whisper. "We're leaving." Eleanor allows herself to be pulled to her feet, but as she passes me, she stops. Her face is a ruin, her eyes full of a venom that has nowhere to go. "You'll regret this," she hisses. "I won't," I reply calmly, without heat. "But you will." They stumble out of the office, a disgraced king and queen dowager, their imagined kingdom dissolved around them. The enablers, Aunt Carol and Uncle Gene, scurry out after them, eager to not be the last ones left in the room with me. The door clicks shut, and the oppressive atmosphere finally lifts. It's just me and Mr. Harrison. The quiet feels profound. He slides a small, heavy set of keys across the polished table. The keys to the house, the keys to the workshop. "He would be so proud of you, Melinda," Mr. Harrison says, and for the first time his professional demeanor cracks, and I see the genuine affection of an old family friend. "You executed his plan perfectly." I pick up the keys. The cold metal feels solid, real, in my palm. This is not about the money, I realize. It's about this. It's about the tangible proof of my father's faith. It's the key to my past and my future. The poetic justice is overwhelming. Eleanor and Marcus, who dedicated their lives to the pursuit of unearned luxury, have been sentenced to humility and hard labor. Their grand plans for selling the house, for liquidating the business, for erasing my father's legacy and me with it, have all come to nothing. They grasped for everything and were left with less than nothing. They were left with a mirror held up to their own empty souls. Their downfall wasn't a punishment I inflicted. It was the natural, mechanical consequence of their own actions. They were a badly made clock, all shiny face and cheap movement, destined to break down. And my father, the master watchmaker, had simply set his own timepiece to reveal the truth at the appointed hour. I don't go back to my small apartment. I drive straight to the house. My father's house. My house. Letting myself in with the key feels momentous. The air inside is stale, carrying the faint, cloying scent of Eleanor's perfume. It feels like a museum of a life that is now over. I walk past the formal living room, past the sterile dining room, and go straight to the one place that has always felt like home, the workshop. I unlock the door and step inside. The familiar smell of oil, wood, and metal washes over me, a scent of creation and peace. Dust motes dance in the slanted afternoon light, just as they always have. Everything is exactly as he left it. His leather apron is slung over the back of his chair. A half-eaten bag of his favorite candies sits on the workbench. It's a time capsule of his life, his passion. I run my hand over the smooth, worn surface of the workbench, scarred with decades of work. This is the altar at which I worshipped, the place where I learned the most important lessons of my life. I walk over to the unfinished movement on its stand, the one I had looked at the night before my father's will was read. I pick up his loop, the cool metal familiar against my eye. I look at the intricate assembly of gears, springs, and levers. It's a world of potential, frozen. Without thinking, I reach for a pair of fine-tipped tweezers, my fingers finding the right tool by instinct. I gently nudge a tiny gear into place. It clicks, a sound no louder than a sigh, but it feels like a thunderclap. It's a symbolic action, I know, but it feels profound. I am not just an inheritor, I am a custodian, a continuer. The legacy isn't the money in the bank, it's the knowledge in my head and the skill in my hands. I'm not just restoring a clock, I'm restoring a life, my father's and my own. The rage and the grief and the tension of the last few months finally begin to recede, replaced by a quiet, focused sense of purpose. The fight wasn't for revenge, it was for this, it was for the truth. It was to ensure that the work would continue, that the song of the escapement would not be silenced. It's remarkable how quickly a person can change, or rather, how quickly they can become who they were always meant to be. For years, I allowed myself to be defined by their narrative. I was the quiet one, the odd one, the girl with grease on her cheek. I internalized their dismissiveness and made myself small to keep the peace. But was that ever truly me? Or was it just a role I was playing in their badly written family drama? Standing here in the sanctuary my father built and left for me, I realized that the patient genius he saw was always there. The quiet was not weakness, it was observation. The patience was not passivity, it was strategy. The fight for his will was not just about claiming what was mine, it was about claiming myself. Have you ever felt that feeling of being seen for something less than you are, of being put into a box that doesn't fit? It's a suffocating feeling, isn't it? We shrink ourselves to fit the expectations of others, to avoid conflict, to make them comfortable. But comfort is the enemy of truth. The empowerment I feel now has very little to do with the financial security I've been given. It comes from the profound, soul-deep satisfaction of justice. It's the feeling of the world finally clicking back into its right alignment. The truth has weight, and for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm carrying it all by myself. My father's final act was to pass that weight to me, not as a burden, but as a mantle of strength. He armed me with the truth and trusted me to know how to use it. This entire ordeal has been a crucible. It burned away the doubt, the insecurity, the need for approval from people who were never capable of giving it. I am not the grieving daughter or the vengeful heiress. I am a watchmaker. I understand that things take time. I understand that true value is not on the surface. And I understand that sometimes you have to let the whole mechanism run down before you can wind it back up and set it to the correct time. 6 months have passed since the day the clock struck 13. The house no longer smells of Eleanor's perfume. It smells of beeswax and lemon oil, the scent of a home being cared for. I've started to clear out the sterile formality of her reign, replacing it with warmth, with books, with life. The workshop is my center, my heart. Sterling Horology is thriving. I have not only maintained my father's client list, but have expanded it. I brought back his old, loyal nurse, the one Eleanor dismissed, as my office manager. Her kindness and integrity are a daily reminder of the sort of people I want to surround myself with. My own designs, the ones my father encouraged, are now coming to life, blending his classic genius with my own modern aesthetic. I am not just preserving his legacy, I am building upon it. As for Eleanor and Marcus, their story has become a quiet local legend. The schadenfreude is potent. They refused, of course, to do the volunteer work. The $5,000 remains untouched in an account at Mr. Harrison's firm. Their pride was worth more to them than the money. They sold their cars and moved into a small, cramped apartment across town. I heard from Aunt Carol, who calls once a month in a desperate, ongoing attempt at reconciliation, that Marcus is working a low-level sales job and Eleanor rarely leaves the apartment. They, who live their lives in the public eye, have been rendered invisible by their own greed. Their downfall is quiet, pathetic, and entirely of their own making. There is a deep and abiding peace in my life now. It's the peace that comes from purpose, from meaningful work, from a truth honored, and a battle well fought. Some nights, when I'm working late at the bench, the light cutting through the dusty air, I can almost feel my father's presence beside me, his quiet pride a comforting warmth on my shoulder. The emotional arc is complete. The betrayal has been answered with strategy. The strategy has brought justice, and the justice has led to a profound, unshakable empowerment. I am Melinda Sterling. I am a watchmaker, and my time is just beginning.